Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 10 true Appalachian horror stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I've worked across the remotest corners of Alaska, but Kennecott left a mark on me so deep I still hear it in my sleep. Now, if you've never been, Kennecott looks like a postcard glued over a nightmare. Red wooden mill buildings stacked against the white face of the Wrangell Mountains, crumbling under ragged weather. In summer, tourists snap photos. In winter, it belongs to the wind and the things that ride with it. About a decade ago, I was hired by a preservation group to help document the surviving structures of Kennecott before restoration began. They wanted sketches of load-bearing frames, photos of interiors, and notes on which places might collapse under heavy snow. It wasn't my first time in a ghost town, but I'd always been wary. The way silence clings to these places. It feels less like history and more like hibernation. That evening in late October, the sun had ditched the valley early, winter's greedy with light in Alaska. Snow drifted waist-high against door frames while the temperature dropped so sharply my breath crystallized before my nose. I'd meant to return to my bunk in the ranger's cabin about a mile off, but the storm pinned me down fast, flinging white curtains until the trail disappeared. My only refuge was what loomed at the center of town, the chapel. At first sight, it looked like salvation. A squat peaked roof covered in white, a single door sagging on swollen hinges, and a cracked cross crowning the front. My boots groaned against the boards as I pushed inside. The chapel smelled of mold, dust, and something milder but unmistakable. Old wax, as though candles had burned not long ago. Pews leaned against each other like drunks in the dark, hymnals split with frost. But it was still better than dying in the storm. I set my lantern at the altar and unrolled my bag nearby, telling myself, just one night, then gone with the morning sun. Only it didn't work out like that. Because not long after, the silence broke with the sound of boots crunching snow outside the door. Part 2. Shadows. That prey, when I first heard it, I thought relief would follow. After all, there are other surveyors, rangers, hikers who sometimes pass through. Company in a storm can mean survival. I called out, a simple, "Hello," but the sound evaporated into the storm. No reply. The crunching stopped exactly at the chapel door. I stood there, lantern light shivering up the old wood. With a shove, I pulled open the warped door. Nothing, just a storm swirling white blindness. No footprints either. Wind had smoothed the drifts like fresh plaster. My rational mind began scrambling. Storm distortion, auditory trick of the valley. That had to be it. I secured the door, sat back down, but the unease clung. It got worse when I turned toward the altar again, because a hymnal lay open there. I hadn't touched it. Swear on my life. Earlier, it had been closed, wedged under dust like the others. But now its thin pages lay peeled back, swollen with damp as though someone sweaty or sobbing had just thumbed through them. The lantern flickered then, glow pulsing faint like breath. That was when the whispers started. I don't mean wind squeals or wood creaks. I mean voices, human, low, like the hushed reciting of scripture done imperfectly, syllables lagging, spitting, groaning through dry throats. Mostly Latin, though mispronounced, broken, like remembering prayer muscle by muscle. My whole spine prickled sharp as nails. I turned toward the pews. One of them creaked. Dust fell from the armrest where invisible weight pressed down. The others followed, wood yawning like bodies shifting, settling in for service. And then I saw it. At the altar rail, kneeling. The figure was hunched low, hands clasped backward on themselves, joints crooked sharply inward as though every finger had been broken and reset wrong. Its head turned slowly sideways. The face was a film of bone and parchment skin. Sunken sockets, jaw working as though chewing ash, my lantern hissed. Died. Dark swaddled the chapel, thick as wet wool. At first, silence. Then deliberate, steady footsteps creaked toward me. Fear can paralyze most men. It paralyzed me. Breath seized, hands numb. I knew it was close because my skin felt pinched, like the air itself froze against me. And then, fingers brushed the back of my neck. Not warm, not even icy. More like absence. The feeling of something void and hollow grazing skin. My body broke paralysis in a violent thrash. I flailed, tipped over my lantern, scattered papers, slammed into pews. The voices rose as one chorus. Not moans now. Sung prayer. Miserere. Overlapping, choking, coughing out syllables while something unseen shoved pews into my path like an obstacle course. I clawed through the dark toward the door. Every step took a year. Somewhere close, the twisted figure's knees cracked against the floorboards as it crawled after me. Its nails scratched grooves into wood, dragging faster. I barreled into the door. It burst outward into the blizzard. Snow slapped my face, numbing me clean, but it was better than inside. Behind me, the chorus strangled into a shriek. I dared look back only once. In the sleeve of storm, yellow glow bled from the chapel windows. Shadows crowded every pane, silhouettes of a congregation pressed against glass, faces stretched long, hollow-mouthed. Their hands beat against the windows, though no sound came through except the rattling hymn inside. And at the door, the bent figure standing now, taller, leaning, its head tilted nearly off its neck as though broken. Even through the whiteout, I swear it was watching me. I stumbled. I crawled through the drifts. I bled my lungs into the storm until the ranger's cabin lantern appeared like a lighthouse. When the ranger opened it, I burst in wild. He sat me down as I raved. When I babbled what I'd seen, he only nodded, face tight. Finally, he said, "Locals don't sleep in that chapel. Last prayer service there was in 38, winter of the shutdown. Whole flock died inside. Snow took their supply run. Starvation took them. Maybe something else. I left Kennecott the next morning. More work was offered. I turned it down. I'll die before I step into that church again. Even now, years later, my nights betray me. I'll be lying safe in my city home when suddenly, there it is, the sound of boots crunching outside. But when I check, there are never footprints. Take this warning if you ever visit Kennecott. Admire its history, photograph its bones, but when the snow falls, leave before dusk. That chapel doesn't offer shelter. It offers a congregation looking for someone, foolish enough to join them. I grew up fishing these Alaskan waters, working longline boats from the time I was barely big enough to pull up halibut without falling over. A man gets to know the sea, its promises and its threats. And I'll be honest, I always respected the legends, but laughed at them too. That was until the night my nets caught more than fish, right off the coast of Portlock. You might not know it, but Portlock was once a buzzing little cannery and mining town on the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. Men hauled coal and ore inland, packed salmon by the river mouth, and their families tried to make a life there. Then one year, sometime after the Second World War, everyone just left. Packed up tools, abandoned houses full of furniture, and vanished. Some say it was downturn and hardship. Others say people were being found, dismembered. Folks spread stories of a creature in the woods, Nantinak, the half-spirit, half-giant said to stalk trespassers. Who's to say? I never put much stock in stories. Fish don't wait on ghost tales. It was work I needed. That fall, I dropped anchor near the ruins, about 200 yards offshore. Everyone else avoided the place, which meant the water was mine. And I'll tell you, the fishing was good. Better than any ground I'd worked. Of course, what happened next made sure I never fished those waters again. It was approaching midnight when my net snagged on something heavy. I figured it was rock or timber, no big deal. But the winch strained hard, groaning as a foul stench reached me over salt wind. Not the sharp, clean smell of fish, no. This was rot. Earthy, sour, waterlogged meat left too long in the sun. When the net finally surfaced, what it held wasn't driftwood. Tangles of bone rose slick and shattered. Human bone. Rib cages warped and broken apart, skulls with jawlines torn jagged. Dozens, maybe more, all knotted in blackened twine. and gore, water-swollen but unmistakable, clung like pale ribbons through the mesh. The sea slapped my boat as if mocking me. Everything in me screamed to cut free. But before I did, something knocked against the hull. Once. Twice. A heavy thump from below, like something alive bracing its back under my boat. My spotlight cut across the water and caught a ripple, too broad, too deliberate to be current, and then the water went black, darker than sea, like ink poured beneath me. That was the last clear breath I took before the night dragged me into its memory, and into the presence of something not human. I cut the line as my guts turned liquid, the net plunging back beneath the waves. But the water didn't calm. It bubbled, a spreading boil like heat rising, except this was ice-cold ocean. The hull shuddered as if a massive beast swam below, brushing its back against me, choosing whether I deserved to stay afloat. Seafarers know the difference between whale, current, and nightmare. This wasn't something natural. The air itself pulsed with pressure, as though the night inhaled. I fumbled for my radio, but static ate every transmission. Just spit and garble. That's when the voices began. From the shoreline I heard distant shouting, though no lights burned in the ghost town. It sounded like men calling orders, the old cadence of laborers. Heave-ho! Steady line! Collapsing in waves of agony, throats tearing into screams. My spotlight swept the shore, and what I saw will play in my head until the day I die. Shapes walked in and out of ruined shacks, dozens of them. Fishermen in oilskins, miners clutching picks, women in dresses worn to tatters. They shone faint blue, dripping water though their feet never touched tide. They weren't alive, but each face contorted as if frozen at the moment of death. Jaws dislocated, eyes rolled, lungs still gasping. They flickered in and out like firelight, yet every step resounded hollow across the shallows. And then they noticed me. Faces, too slack to scream, turned toward my boat. The chorus of working men twisted, became a moan that whistled like empty bottles. As one, their heads craned, following me. The tide surged suddenly. The boat rocked so viciously I nearly went under. Looking down, I saw the black water split, pale arms rising. Not fish, not human. Arms, dozens, maybe hundreds, clawing upward, jointed wrong, fingertips skinned, nails gone. They slithered over one another without bones bending properly, grabbing at the hull. When their hands struck wood, frost spread along the planks. My deck iced beneath my boots. I lost grip, nearly pitched over the side as the boat tilted into the pull. Their combined dragging began to skew me toward land, straight toward the haunted ruins. Over the shrieking wind, I swore I heard one word torn from their 1,000 cracked mouths. Stay. I fought against the drag with everything I had. Engine throttled till it shrieked, every line straining. The pale hands clawed, shattering fingernails into splintered wood. Inch by inch I managed to veer the bow away from shore, straining toward open sea. The storm sheets of black water closed, but behind me the voices followed. I glanced back once, and that's when I truly understood why Portlock fell silent. On the beach stood the ruins of the mine entrance, collapsed timbers jutting like ribs from a carcass. And just for a blistering second, the door of reality tore itself open. I saw something vast, crouched just inside, blacker than stone with limbs too wide to belong to a man. Its outline bled into the darkness as though the mine itself was its mouth. Those spirits weren't rising by their own will. They were being spit out, used, pulled up like bait for intruding eyes. The thing inside that mine stared at me without eyes, yet I felt its focus stab into my skull. My hands shook so violently I nearly lost the helm, and then, without warning, the arms released me. My boat lurched free as though spat out. The figures on the shore crumpled, dissolving like mist when the sun rises. And the tide. The tide went calm. Suddenly, eerily calm, as if nothing had ever moved. By dawn, I found myself drifting miles off course. The net was gone, my deck scarred, beams gouged by dozens of hands. When I tried to speak of it later, fishermen hushed me quick. One old Tlingit man pulled me aside and said only, "You called it to the surface." Portlock remembers nets soaked in blood. When men dig into earth, sometimes earth digs back. I never returned. I won't fish those waters again, no matter how tempting the catch. The boat still sails, but the scars remain across her hull, proof scraped deep as my bones. Nights when the sea is low and the fog encroaches, I'll hear it again. Faint voices on the tide, men laboring, women wailing. The sea itself begging me to stay, but I don't. And if you've sense in you, you won't either. Because Portlock isn't abandoned. It's waiting. Silent towns don't just drown. Something holds them there. And if you anchor too close, you risk being the next soul swallowed by the mine mouth and spat into eternity as one of its drowned. I worked as a healthcare contractor for the state of Alaska back in the mid-90s, which means I spent plenty of time in remote villages, places even Alaskans only half believe exist. That's how I ended up stranded in Ukivok, what some still whisper about, a dead cliffside village the government never bothered to completely salvage. The place had been carved right into impossible angles of a cliff over the Bering Sea. Wooden platforms clung to the mountain's ribs, narrow walkways connecting shacks and old buildings high above the churning gray waves. They called it abandoned. I called it misfiled, because although the larger community pulled out in the 1950s, leaving behind crumbling homes and a rusted cannery, certain structures still stood. Chief among them was a clinic. The villagers used it during the influenza outbreaks of the late 30s and 40s, then shut it up when too many bodies stacked inside to pretend recovery was possible. It sat there atop its stilts, sagging but intact, catching wind like a drum. My role? Basic logistical support and medical supply oversight. That fall, an exploratory team wanted to catalog what remained of Ukivok for potential historic registry. I was meant only to confirm the clinic's layout, take notes for the files, then fly back out with the crew. But Alaska did what Alaska does best. The weather crashed into us like iron. Storm rolled across the sea without mercy, grounding the pilot. So we stayed the night. The others elected to camp in old domiciles lower on the slope. I foolishly claimed the hospital. "Solid roof," I said. My colleagues laughed nervously, warned me I'd get company. From the moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The clinic smelled of iodine leached deep into boards, sharper still than the mold. Cabinets lined with rusty scalpels, broken syringes, and medication bottles rolled empty across the floor. A broken wheelchair leaned against the wall, one wheel squealing in the draft. But the worst part were the cribs. Rusted iron, still set against the walls of the children's ward. Tiny blankets, stiff with time, sagged in place. By sunset, the sea stopped being water and became sound. The crashing surf thundered directly beneath, endless, lonely percussion. The wind jarred each window frame until moans wormed through. I lit my lantern and set up my cot. Told myself, nothing here but bad history. Then the coughing started. It began faint, almost soft enough to dismiss, a child's choking cough caught in the wind. But my nurse's instincts recognized rhythm. Wheezing, racking fits. It was followed by another, then another sound. Quick inhales and the scrape of small throats tightening. They overlapped as though an entire ward woke sick and restless, invisible lungs filling around me. I picked up my lantern, skin prickling against the icy draft. My light stretched across the ward, landing on one of the cribs. Blankets trembled slightly, just enough to suggest the weight of something turning beneath them. I moved closer, and for that instant wished I hadn't. Shadows shifted beneath the cracked quilt as though an infant rolled over, except no form emerged under the light. The blanket just stirred and fell still again. A crash spun me around. One of the old medication cabinets had swung open on its hinges, and every bottle clattered loose onto the floor, some shattering, scattering glass and powder. In the mess, my light caught a trail of small handprints smeared across the dust, leading away from the spill toward the hall. I told myself, psychosomatic, stress hallucination, but my legs disobeyed reason, dragging me down the corridor. Each corner bent wrong, construction warped by time until angles built into themselves. My lantern halo bounced across walls scribbled with something blackened. Not pencil, not paint. Closer, I realized, fingernail scratches. Too short for adults. That's when the voices joined. A dozen childish murmurs whispering from the surgery room. I shoved the warped door, hinges shrieking. My lantern's glow reached steel bed frames, stained long brown. Atop the mattress, indentations sagged where unseen bodies pressed down. The room filled with tiny gasps, sick laughter cut off by sudden silence. I thought then, leave. But behind me, the hallway sealed itself in coughing again, echoes closing like hands pressing me forward, and then footsteps heavier than the rest echoed above, on the next floor. I climbed. Halfway up the stairs, the entire structure heaved. It felt less like wind and more like sheer weight settling on the clinic from above. The cries of children swelled into hysterical chorus, impossible to parse. Doors slammed one after another as though dozens of nurses ran shut to contain contagion. My heartbeat hurt my ears. And then it all changed into one grinding noise. The unmistakable squeak of a wheelchair rolling slowly overhead. The top floor had been the isolation wing. Plague Place, end of the line. The door hung crooked as if someone had fought hard to get out. My lantern fought shadows until its flame seemed a weak match. Inside, rows of beds sagged inward, frames collapsed, blankets in heaps. And dead center sat that same rusted wheelchair now angled toward me, though no one had energy to ever drag it there. The wheel squeaked, turned one notch farther, and stopped. I felt eyes then. Not one pair, but dozens, hundreds packed into the room unseen, pressing heatless gazes. My throat seized cold. Then every bed frame groaned under sudden weight, springs stretching as invisible children flopped upward in synchronized agony. They coughed, thrashed, bent spines until metal screamed. Unseen bodies rolled and collapsed in impossible ways, and all at once the entire wing began screaming out, hundreds of wails overlapping in a pitch that vibrated my skull. I dropped my lantern. Darkness swallowed everything. I fell to my knees, clawing to the door, but the sound moved with me as if the hospital itself funneled shrieks into my ears. My palms shredded on old nails. Then, from the black, small, icy hands grasped my wrists, dozens at once. They didn't hold to harm, not exactly. They wanted. Pleading grips guiding me toward the beds like they wanted me there. Wanted me to lie down and never rise again. My chest collapsed under panic. I fought with terror unlike any I'd ever known. Thrashed until my arms tore loose, scrambled back down the hallway as chilling hands tugged at my clothes. The stairwell groaned, splinters snapping, boards dropping into black surf below. I hurled myself over, crashing through a lower door into night air. The beach storm battered me like claws, but when I looked back the clinic glowed faintly within. Light strobed from window frames, silhouetting small figures, dozens of children lined against the glass, faces sunken, coughing, pressing their palms outward. In the center upstairs the wheelchair rolled forward again, one steady squeal audible even over the sea. We survived Storm's night. Next day the pilot came. My colleagues avoided my eyes when I confessed what I saw. One of them, though, whispered later, they left them there. Ran out of supplies, boarded up, let the sick stay behind. Parents, children, whole wings. Ptarmigan wind carried the dead, but souls. They stayed. I swore I'd never sleep in an abandoned clinic again. Yet, some nights I wake in my warm house to the sound of children coughing in the hall. Fainter each year, but never gone. Because abandonment doesn't cure disease. It only gives infection eternity. I worked the Alaska Railroad for 25 years, long enough to deliver supplies, passengers, and more than a few hunters and fishermen to some of the loneliest stops on Earth. Along the way, you see abandoned depots, skeletons of old promises. But none hit me like the Seward railhouse, what the locals called the last stop that waits forever. Now, back in the day, Seward's depot was the gateway. Freight came into Resurrection Bay. Passengers poured through the railhouse, carrying their dreams up into the interior. Over decades it wore down. Passenger service dwindled, and finally the station closed in the 1960s, left to rot under storms that roll straight off the Gulf of Alaska. An empty building sitting on rusted tracks. No big deal, right? Except, ask any crew who passed along those rails and you'll hear stories. Strange lights. The echo of wheels where no train runs. Shadows leaning from the windows as if the station still bustles when everyone knows it's dead. I never bought into rumors until the night the timetable forced me into an overnight at Seward. That was early spring. The crew yard clerks cleared out fast, all muttering excuses about homes and warm kitchens. I stayed back inventorying cargo. My plan was to bunk down in town later, but weather pinned me, and walking in freezing sleet didn't appeal. Looking up, the railhouse loomed dark, closer shelter than any motel. That's how I found myself climbing its warped steps, lantern in hand, telling myself it was just wood and nails. The place smelled like wet iron and mildew. Ticket counters sagged, windows smashed by salt air. My boots echoed too loudly on the tile, like walking through a cathedral abandoned by God. Benches lay splintered. Schedules still clung yellowing to the walls, timelines for trains that never ran anymore. I set down my lantern, ate a cold sandwich, and convinced myself I'd sleep in the corner, just another man waiting out a storm. But solitude never lasts. Around midnight I heard it, the soft clang of metal on metal like wheels kissing iron. Then a whistle, thin, far away, carried on the wind. My breath froze, because I knew no trains ran through here anymore. The tracks had been sealed for years. Yet in that silence the sound rolled closer. The storm died back as though the world hushed to listen. From deep within the depot the floor began to tremble as though an engine approached, and I was no longer alone. The vibration grew until dust cascaded from the rafters. I rose, lantern shaking in my hand, and stepped into the main platform hall. I'll never forget what I saw. A pale light stretched through the broken windows. Not lantern, not electric. Faint yellow, the hue of old kerosene lamps. And along the benches sat people, dozens of them, lined shoulder to shoulder. Men in old coats, women in Sunday dresses, coal-smudged workers. Not solid flesh, but faded, humming with that same glow. They didn't move at first, just sat with bags at their feet, eyes sunken as though waiting beyond waiting. Then came the sound, a murmur, faint, commuters chatting, a mother shushing her child, the rustle of newspapers folded, ghostly life blooming in dead walls. My heart pounded like a hammer. Logic screamed, these were tricks of lantern glow. But then one passenger turned fully toward me, eyes hollow sockets yet fixed directly on mine. His lips peeled back in what I thought was a grin, until the whisper reached from him to me, crawling into my ear though his mouth barely moved. Train's late. The words spread down the benches. One by one, others echoed it, layered like a chant. Train's late. Train's late. Train's late. Until the whole hall filled with a rising chorus of ghost commuters reciting a delay that spanned decades. Then, outside, the whistle screamed again, louder now, vibrating the depot glass. I hurried toward the doors, lantern lifting into sleet, and what I saw froze me utterly. The tracks, rusted, broken, unfinished, were glowing. Lines of iron shimmered silver as though new, stretching endless into the night. And there, at the end of the tracks, a headlight cut through fog, an engine, black and glistening. Steam billowed, wheels clanking. A train coming fast, but silent, not a noise save the hiss of air that makes your teeth ache. The hall behind me stirred like a hive awakening. Footsteps shuffled, benches scraped. The passengers rose, dragging suitcases through dust, filing silently toward the platform. Their mouths moved, but their words formed nothing living, only that mantra. Train's late. Train's late. I stumbled back, my boots catching on rotten planks. The ghostly crowd pressed forward, brushing past me with chill gusts that tore warmth from my chest. One child clutched my arm briefly, small ice fingers that burned against my sleeve as her hollow eyes lifted to mine. She whispered, soft as ash, "Don't get on." The platform swarmed an impossible life. Shadows of men and women pressed shoulder to shoulder, boarding a train that should not exist. The glowing locomotive hissed, its metal darker than the night, slick with something not oil, not water, almost like congealed tar. Its cars stretched beyond sight, doors gaping open without light inside, like mouths waiting to swallow. One by one, the passengers vanished into those doors. They didn't climb. They simply drifted upward, bodies dissolving as they passed into the black. Each face slackened as though surrendering, as if they had no choice but to honor schedules written long ago. I stood frozen, heart racing, when the crowd thinned enough to reveal the conductor. Tall, gaunt, figure cloaked in old uniform. His cap shadowed most of his face, but when he glanced at me, that shadow deepened, hollow where features should be. He raised a silver punch ticket in one hand, gleaming under unnatural light. His voice rolled across the depot like low thunder. Passenger aboard. And then a ticket appeared in my hand. I swear, I don't know how. It was suddenly there, paper damp, with my name printed faint as though written decades earlier. The number read, "Final Ride." Terror overtook me. I dropped the lantern. It shattered, flames sputtering useless. I fought the ticket like it was poison, clawing my hand until blood dripped but the paper clung, searing skin cold. The child's voice echoed again in my skull. "Don't get on. Don't get on." The conductor raised his hand a final time. The whistle tore through the night, shattering air like glass. The ground convulsed as if steel wheels shrieked across the depot itself. I dove backward into the hall, slammed through the doors, tore across benches. The building wailed with the sound of grinding metal, screams, rushing steam. My ears split with agony as though I was under the weight of an avalanche. And then, silence. When I staggered to my feet, dawn glow tinted the shattered depot windows. The tracks were rust once again, broken, ending just yards beyond the railhouse. No train, no passengers, only dust swirling in stale air, but still the ticket remained. Crumpled, blood-stained, pressed against my palm. It never vanished until I burned it myself that night, in a barrel outside Anchorage. And yet, sometimes when I'm near freight yards, I hear faint wheels groaning, whistles calling through fog, and my hand tingles where the ticket once seared itself into flesh. I never stayed alone in an abandoned station again, and if you ever pass Seward's rusting depot, keep walking. Because sooner or later, that train always comes back and it's not bound for any town on this earth. I ran sled dogs for most of my life. Long tours, supply routes, even a few races on the Iditarod trail. Some folks fall in love with the stars or the ocean. Me? It was the sound of paws crunching snow, the steady huff of breath in the cold, the way the world empties into silence except for the rhythm of dogs pulling you forward. But there was one route I swore I'd never take again. It runs near the ruins of Iditarod, once the shining capital of Alaska's gold rush in the interior. At its peak, it had saloons, banks, even a newspaper. Then the mines dried up and winter reclaimed everything. By the 1950s, no one was left. A ghost town standing in endless white. I'd heard stories, from old mushers, from villagers, that sled teams would go quiet when passing its ruins, ears low, tails tucked. Some said they saw shadow dogs loping alongside, eyes burning in the dark. Others said they heard voices, miners, gamblers, prospectors crying from beneath snow-covered roofs. I halfway believed them. I halfway laughed. That changed during a supply run in the winter of 2001. My cargo sled stacked high with food and fuel, I drove 12 dogs across hardpack forest, aiming for a checkpoint to the east. But a storm cut us sideways. Wind howled blind, snow veiled any trail. I let the leader do his work. By the time the weather cleared, my lantern revealed sagging, false front buildings, half swallowed by drifts. Iditarod. Hollow windows dripped black. Roof beams crooked like gallows crossbars. The silence of that place was different than wilderness silence. It felt heavy, grave-like, pressing down until even the dogs whined low. My leader braced, paws spread, refusing to pass the first street. His hackles rose. I cracked the whip lightly, coaxing, not punishing. Still, his eyes rolled white, and then I heard it. The shuffle of paws, but not from my dogs. From behind the buildings, the sound came steady, measured, a full team running with cadence perfect as mine. Harness chains rattling, sled runners cutting ice. But no light, no lantern, no driver visible in the dark. Just the rhythm of an invisible team pacing parallel along ruined shop fronts. I froze, snow burning my face. My dogs whined, heads turning, ears laid flat against skulls. Then, one by one, they stopped pulling. The entire team sat upright in harness, straining but staring. Ears locked on the shadow street. That's when I saw them. Shapes moved between broken door frames. Not solid, not smoke. Dogs, a full sled team, black outlines against snow. Their bodies flickered like flames in the wind. Paws not breaking crust, leaving no track. Each head turned toward us. Their eyes glowed pale silver, not animal, not wild. They looked straight through me, impossible weight in their gaze. The leader of that phantom team lifted his nose skyward and howled. The sound tore through marrow. It wasn't dog, and it wasn't wolf. It was hunger, grief, loneliness, all braided into one endless note. And as soon as it started, my team panicked. The tangle was chaos. Dogs screaming, twisting in harness, lunging sideways as if desperate to flee the trail. I fought the lines, yelling commands, but their terror outweighed my authority. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw more. Figures moving by broken saloon doors. Men in ragged coats, faces caved inward, necks bent wrong. Their mouths opened and closed, whispering, though no breath plumed. The whispers rose like the wind. Keep going. Keep going. Don't stop. And still, the phantom team matched our erratic pace, sliding effortlessly beside. The ghost driver appeared then. Face wrapped in scarf, goggles cracked, but where flesh should have been, only frostbitten bone winked underneath. His whip rose, cracked the air, but no sound followed. His dogs lunged as one, their vaporous jaws dripping crystal frost. We were being herded. No matter how I turned, the phantom team stayed beside us. They pressed closer, spectral paws phasing through drifts, keeping tight formation. The whispers surged, men's voices begging, cursing, commanding. My dogs bolted into the ruined main street, dragging us deeper into Iditarod's lifeless heart. Buildings loomed over us like gravestones. Then came the pull. The snow beneath warped, grooves carving parallel lines as though two phantom runners glided just feet from ours. My sled jolted hard, nearly tipping as unseen power fought to drag me into their lane. The ghost driver turned toward me, bone teeth wide, whip raised in invitation or command. The whispers sharpened into command. Join, join, never stop. My leader dog gnashed his teeth, fighting the lines. His tail tucked deep, his eyes wild with life-saving terror. In that moment, instinct hit. If we didn't break free, my team would pull forever beside shadows, never reaching daylight, never dying, condemned to endless trail running for an eternity of hunger. I yanked the snow hook, jammed it down, and screamed every command I knew, my throat tearing raw. My dogs writhed against harness until one broke loose, lunging forward with raw panic. The hook tore a groove, sled rocking, but momentum bloomed. Like a dam breaking, we exploded out of shadow formation, curved sharp off the main road, charging down a riverbed glazed in ice. The phantom team howled behind, one last unearthly note that lasted too long, echoing until it merged with wind. When I dared look back, Iditarod's building sagged silent again. Empty. No shadows. No whispers. Only the sound of my dogs panting and the long creak of snow beneath real paws. By dawn, we hit checkpoint, my dogs foam-flecked and trembling, me pale as a corpse. I told no one the truth, that in Iditarod, whole teams eternally pace the ruins, their dead driver steering them down trails that never end. But some nights, when storms howl, my dogs prick ears at phantom sounds. And I wonder, when death finally takes me, will I find myself lashed in harness, pulling beside the dead toward towns long gone? Because the trail never stops. It only waits. If you've ever walked the ghost of a trail, you know it feels different from wilderness untouched. The land remembers men. And nothing remembers more bitterly than DA. the gold rush boomtown near the Chilkoot Trail. A century ago, it was footsteps and shouts, pack animals screaming, and men clawing their way north chasing treasure. But in 1898, an avalanche buried dozens alive just above the town. Dia never recovered. The tide flats swallowed its docks, the forest split its cabins, and now they say even silence there is weighted with the dead. I've worked as a backcountry guide most of my life, leading curious souls where wagons turned to dust. One September tour season slowed down. I decided to stay behind alone for one final night, camping on Dia's ruins. I wanted stillness without clients, time to remind myself why solitude is a medicine. The weather was calm, leaves yellowing with the turn, wind so soft it felt like peace. I pitched camp at the old town site, near where the buildings crooked low into moss. My dog, a mutt who'd followed me everywhere, whined the moment I settled my tent. His ears twitched toward the mountains, hackles lifted. I told myself animals smell bears or wolves before we do. Still, his tremors felt like warnings. After dark, frost edged the canvas and stars burned knives overhead. The tide whispered across the flats, sucking salt through bone-pale roots. I dozed, I think, but sometime past midnight sound cracked me awake. Not wind, not tide. Voices, lots of them, men barking commands, boots pounding dirt, the unmistakable cadence of stampeders hauling everything they owned up over the pass. Then another noise joined, a grinding, collapsing roar that reverberated in my chest. An avalanche. Except no snow fell. The dog whimpered into my ribs as outside, in the open ruin, the dead of Dia began walking the trail again. I stepped out of the tent, lantern trembling in hand. The night lit itself in frostlight. Mountains braced against the stars. At first, the valley appeared empty. Then movement flickered, shadows cutting across streets no longer there. Packs heaped high, heads bowed under weight. Lines of men in wool and flannel appeared, dozens, scores, moving in exhausted rhythm across the marsh as if the tide flats were still the bustling Chilkoot corridor. Their boots struck ground without sound. Their eyes never left the ridges ahead, faces pale, smeared in shadow, yet so vivid I thought I could reach out, shoulder to shoulder, except none of them breathed vapor. They weren't here for me. Above, thunder boomed across the ridgeline. I craned my neck. The slope glittered, then blurred. White thunder rolled, avalanche pouring down in horrific silence, swallowing the spectral line where it marched. Figures flailed, limbs breaking, crushed flat, vanishing beneath powder that turned translucent before my eyes. And then, the avalanche replayed. Once more the white flow poured down, but this time it didn't vanish. It came lower, wider, spilling out across Dia's flats where my camp huddled. The whisper of thousands of tons of snow roared through my skull, even though the ground stood solid. The dog bolted, yanking his lead free, sprinting toward trees. Smart animal, I, on the other hand, froze as the ruined saloon beside me came alive. Its glassless windows flickered with lamplight. Inside, silhouettes hunched around tables, gold pans clattering, mugs raised. Their mouths moved in ragged laughter, though all I heard was broken wind. One turned toward me. A skeletal man with scalp half missing like avalanche teeth had ripped straight through him. His eyes burned faint red coals. His jaw sank low as his whisper slithered. We never made it out. The shadows nearest him repeated it. Then more. Soon 100 voices rolled from empty cabins and snow-shadowed streets, hissing in chorus. We never made it out. The whispers surrounded me from every ruin. My lantern sputtered as if being starved. The ground pulsed beneath my boots, though no snow fell. My tent collapsed on itself with a hiss like suffocating lungs as unseen weight bore down. It was then I understood. The avalanche wasn't happening again. It was always happening. It rolled eternally down those ridges, invisible but crushing, replayed loop of suffering that never exhaled its last breath. The miners of Dia never escaped the pass. They tramped forever, crushed forever, whispering warning forever. Suddenly the dog howled from the tree line, frantic, desperate cries. It snapped me out of paralysis. Holding lantern high, I staggered backward, forcing my legs to run. The avalanche's phantom wall bled across the flats, spectral snow dust lashing my face though the air was dead calm. In its rolling wave, I saw faces, hundreds mashed into the drift, mouths open in screams swallowed by ice. My boot snagged a root. I pitched forward, lantern crashing, flames snuffed. Darkness smothered everything. I clawed through brush, lungs scraped raw as the chorus screamed, every voice layered. We never made it out. We never made it out. When I exploded through timber where the dog shivered, the sound stopped. Just like that. Dead silent except for the dog's whine. Behind us, Daya's ruins lay moonlit again. No avalanche, no men, only sagging skeletons of cabins. By dawn, I was gone. I will never forget the lesson. Even in death, some tragedies don't end. They roll, they bury, they smother forever. Daya sleeps under tides and moss, but the snow never stopped falling in that valley. To this day, when guiding near Chilkoot, I take routes wide away from those ruins, and I tell every traveler the truth. Don't linger in Dia after dark. Those stampeders whisper still, dragging you into their endless avalanche, because they never made it out, and they want you to understand their terror firsthand. I'd been working odd jobs on the Alaskan coast for years. Seasonal labor mostly, port security, dock work, sometimes watch duty, the kind of jobs men take when they don't want too many questions asked. That's how I wound up at the old Nushagak cannery outside Dillingham. The cannery was a skeleton even back then, long closed down since the boom years when salmon were hauled in by tons, gutted, canned, and shipped south by the barrel. By the late 90s, industry had collapsed and the place was left to rot, boards splitting under coastal rain. But companies still owned the land and wanted someone to keep an eye out for vandals or scavengers. Cheap labor for an empty grave of a building. I'd walk the rusting conveyor belts, past corroded machines that once stripped fish in bloody rhythm. Flies still buzzed even in winter there, don't ask me how. The air clung thick with the sour ghost of old salmon flesh, guts that had fused into the very wood grain. At night, that smell got worse. It seeped like it was fresh. Locals muttered about the place. Said too many men had died on those factory lines. Knives slipped, machines chewed fingers, and workers who bled out on wet floors weren't unusual. Around 1919, an influenza outbreak killed entire crews who were locked inside to keep working. Their bodies were carted out by the dozens. The cannery never bothered with memorial, just replaced men like broken gears. The first 2 nights, nothing happened. Just wind hammering the sheet metal siding, gulls keening. But on the 3rd night, midnight bore something worse than loneliness. I'd just circled the main floor, boots clanging on hollow planks, when I swore I heard boots behind me. I spun my beam across conveyor belts, just rust and steel meeting shadow. But faint footsteps kept pace, echoing after I stopped. My fingers tightened on the flashlight. This wasn't townsfolk. Nobody sane broke into Nushagak. What prowled those nights? Wasn't living. The smell shifted then. Fish guts turned into something sweeter, rotting and syrupy like spoiled blood. My skin pricked. Out of the corner of my vision, one of the belt machines shuddered. Its chain jumped once, links clinking like teeth-biting bone. That factory wasn't empty anymore. I forced myself back onto rounds, beam, sweeping. The further into the cannery's gut I went, the louder it got. Not normal noise. The shuffle of boots on wet floors, the slap of knives against block, men coughing as if the room brimmed with fish guts again. But the building was empty. My flashlight landed on work tables where filleting once happened. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Shapes crowded around those benches, translucent men hunched in aprons, arms jerking blades in rhythm. Their faces sagged pale and slack, jaws chewing though no sound left their throats. Each slammed their knives down. The echo reverberated as though steel still struck cartilage. They worked in silence until one by one their hollow eyes lifted and all fixed on me across the room. I stumbled backward, beam shaking. The figures froze their cutting. In hideous, wet unison, they all whispered through air too cold to hold breath. The line don't stop. I bolted toward the office wing. My footsteps slapped louder than the echoes. But try as I ran, the noise of knives followed, chopping faster, keeping pace. Blood smell rose pungent. The raw stench of fresh salmon ripped open, even though I hadn't seen a real fish in that building for decades. At the far end, the foreman's platform sat high above the sorting floor. I climbed those stairs 2 at a time. The wall clock up there, hands long broken, suddenly lurched forward, though no batteries fed it. The dial spun in manic pace, whirling until it burst glass into shards that rained across the office. When I looked back down, the floor swarmed. Dozens of figures now, shadows layered on shadows, moving in jerky patterns along conveyor belts that screeched without power. Cans clinked, slamming down invisible rails. Some figures staggered with bleeding stumps for hands. Others coughed endlessly, faces blistered as if flu fevers boiled inside them still. And above the tide of it all came one voice, thick with command, bellowing from nowhere. "Back online! Back online!" The workers turned toward me as one. Their knives clattered against the tables in a synchronized demand. I swear, every whisper that followed came from their ruined mouths, hundreds chanting rhythmically, "You, join the line." At that moment, panic became rage. I clutched the railing, bellowed into the dark, "I ain't working your line." My voice cracked against the chorus. The workers froze, then tilted their heads in perfect unison, spines creaking like wet timber. The foreman appeared below. His figure bulked unnatural, towering, shoulders gone wider than any man. His cap shadowed what passed for a face, but lantern light caught emptiness beneath. No flesh, just dripping sockets where eyes once burned. He raised his hand, and immediately the machinery screamed. Belts whirred, gears ground, rust showered sparks. The entire canery shrieked alive, powered not by electricity but by the weight of countless dead hands. The workers moved again, faster now, swinging knives in arcs that split air with phantom sprays. The chant deepened. "Join the line." The foreman pointed toward me, and then the floor itself shifted. Conveyor rails warped upward like grasping arms. Chains slithered across planks toward the stairs. Hooks swayed, slick with phantom gore. I'd swear every shadow worker dropped their knives then and surged as one tide toward the stairs. I scrambled back, the stairwell groaning. The foreman's roar shook tin walls. "No one leaves before shifts end." His howl split into coughing wheeze, a sound of lungs drowned by influenza, but it carried force enough to rattle my ribs. By instinct alone, I hurled myself through the nearest window. Glass shredded my arms, but icy air hit my face. I crashed into mud and brine outside. Behind me, the canery shook until it sounded like an entire fleet grinding at sea. Windows pulsed with pale red light, silhouettes of men still slicing, still coughing, forever drowning in their own sweat. The noise died the moment I staggered beyond the property edge. Just silence. The smell of rot faded, leaving salt and pine. When I looked back, the building stood empty, dark, leaning toward collapse like it had a century. I finished my contract, but only with daylight patrols. Nights belonged to the dead crew now. Locals never questioned why the canery remained unused. It wasn't rust that killed industry there, not really. It was memory. It was hunger. To this day, when I crack open a canned fish in my kitchen, sometimes I hear it, the sharp clang of knife, the foreman's bark, and dozens of lips in dead unison whispering, "The line don't stop." And maybe it never will. I'd been working odd jobs on the Alaskan coast for years. Seasonal labor mostly, port security, dock work, sometimes watch duty, the kind of jobs men take when they don't want too many questions asked. That's how I wound up at the old Nushagak cannery outside Dillingham. The cannery was a skeleton even back then, long closed down since the boom years when salmon were hauled in by tons, gutted, canned, and shipped south by the barrel. By the late 90s, industry had collapsed and the place was left to rot, boards splitting under coastal rain. But companies still owned the land and wanted someone to keep an eye out for vandals or scavengers. Cheap labor for an empty grave of a building. I'd walk the rusting conveyor belts, past corroded machines that once stripped fish in bloody rhythm. Flies still buzzed even in winter there, don't ask me how. The air clung thick with the sour ghost of old salmon flesh, guts that had fused into the very wood grain. At night, that smell got worse. It seeped like it was fresh. Locals muttered about the place. Said too many men had died on those factory lines. Knives slipped, machines chewed fingers, and workers who bled out on wet floors weren't unusual. Around 1919, an influenza outbreak killed entire crews who were locked inside to keep working. Their bodies were carted out by the dozens. The cannery never bothered with memorial, just replaced men like broken gears. The first 2 nights, nothing happened. Just wind hammering the sheet metal siding, gulls keening. But on the 3rd night, midnight bore something worse than loneliness. I'd just circled the main floor, boots clanging on hollow planks, when I swore I heard boots behind me. I spun my beam across conveyor belts, just rust and steel meeting shadow. But faint footsteps kept pace, echoing after I stopped. My fingers tightened on the flashlight. This wasn't townsfolk. Nobody sane broke into Nushagak. What prowled those nights? Wasn't living. The smell shifted then. Fish guts turned into something sweeter, rotting and syrupy like spoiled blood. My skin pricked. Out of the corner of my vision, one of the belt machines shuddered. Its chain jumped once, links clinking like teeth-biting bone. That factory wasn't empty anymore. I forced myself back onto rounds, beam, sweeping. The further into the cannery's gut I went, the louder it got. Not normal noise. The shuffle of boots on wet floors, the slap of knives against block, men coughing as if the room brimmed with fish guts again. But the building was empty. My flashlight landed on work tables where filleting once happened. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Shapes crowded around those benches, translucent men hunched in aprons, arms jerking blades in rhythm. Their faces sagged pale and slack, jaws chewing though no sound left their throats. Each slammed their knives down. The echo reverberated as though steel still struck cartilage. They worked in silence until one by one their hollow eyes lifted and all fixed on me across the room. I stumbled backward, beam shaking. The figures froze their cutting. In hideous, wet unison, they all whispered through air too cold to hold breath. The line don't stop. I bolted toward the office wing. My footsteps slapped louder than the echoes. But try as I ran, the noise of knives followed, chopping faster, keeping pace. Blood smell rose pungent. The raw stench of fresh salmon ripped open. Even though I hadn't seen a real fish in that building for decades, at the far end, the foreman's platform sat high above the sorting floor. I climbed those stairs 2 at a time. The wall clock up there, hands long broken, suddenly lurched forward though no batteries fed it. The dial spun in manic pace, whirling until it burst glass into shards that rained across the office. When I looked back down, the floor swarmed. Dozens of figures now, shadows layered on shadows, moving in jerky patterns along conveyor belts that screeched without power. Cans clinked, slamming down invisible rails. Some figures staggered with bleeding stumps for hands. Others coughed endlessly, faces blistered as if flu fevers boiled inside them still. And above the tide of it all came one voice, thick with command, bellowing from nowhere. "Back on line! Back on line!" The workers turned toward me as one. Their knives clattered against the tables in a synchronized demand. I swear, every whisper that followed came from their ruined mouths, hundreds chanting rhythmically, "You, join the line." At that moment, panic became rage. I clutched the railing, bellowed into the dark, "I ain't working your line." My voice cracked against the chorus. The workers froze, then tilted their heads in perfect unison, spines creaking like wet timber. The foreman appeared below, his figure bulked unnatural, towering, shoulders gone wider than any man. His cap shadowed what passed for a face, but lantern light caught emptiness beneath. No flesh, just dripping sockets where eyes once burned. He raised his hand, and immediately the machinery screamed. Belts whirred, gears ground, rust showered sparks. The entire cannery shrieked alive, powered not by electricity but by the weight of countless dead hands. The workers moved again. faster now, swinging knives in arcs that split air with phantom sprays. The chant deepened. Join the line. The foreman pointed toward me, and then the floor itself shifted. Conveyor rails warped upward like grasping arms. Chains slithered across planks toward the stairs. Hooks swayed, slick with phantom gore. I'd swear every shadow worker dropped their knives then and surged as one tied toward the stairs. I scrambled back, the stairwell groaning. The foreman's roar shook tin walls. No one leaves before shifts end. His howl split into coughing wheeze, a sound of lungs drowned by influenza, but it carried force enough to rattle my ribs. By instinct alone, I hurled myself through the nearest window. Glass shredded my arms, but icy air hit my face. I crashed into mud and brine outside. Behind me, the canery shook until it sounded like an entire fleet grinding at sea. Windows pulsed with pale red light, silhouettes of men still slicing, still coughing, forever drowning in their own sweat. The noise died the moment I staggered beyond the property edge. Just silence. The smell of rot faded, leaving salt and pine. When I looked back, the building stood empty, dark, leaning toward collapse like it had a century. I finished my contract, but only with daylight patrols. Nights belonged to the dead crew now. Locals never questioned why the canery remained unused. It wasn't rust that killed industry there, not really. It was memory. It was hunger. To this day, when I crack open a canned fish in my kitchen, sometimes I hear it, the sharp clang of knife, the foreman's bark, and dozens of lips in dead unison whispering, "The line don't stop." And maybe it never will. My name's Raymond Ellison. Folks just call me Ray. I worked as a seasonal ranger up around Hatcher's Pass during the early 90s and into the 2000s, mostly guiding trekkers, checking cabins, making sure folks didn't get themselves killed by doing something stupid in avalanche country. I've always respected the mountains. See, out here, nature teaches you quick. She doesn't whisper. She slaps you in the teeth. But what I ran into one bleak autumn wasn't nature. It was something older, something still clinging to the bones of this land long past when it should have let go. I was making a patrol in late September, a time when the gold rush remnants seem to sigh a little louder in the wind. The foliage dies back, cabins settle deeper into the rot, and the nights stretch like long shadows. I'd been out solo for 3 days. On my 4th, I came across one of those half-forgotten sites, an abandoned prospector's camp with 3 half-collapsed shacks, their roofs sagging like broken backs under decades of snow load. Off to one side was an old shaft, framed with warped timbers, filled halfway with rocks from a cave-in. The place had that look about it, as if the earth had gobbled it down whole and was still chewing. There was something strange, though. In the window of the least damaged shack, a light flickered. Just a faint, steady glow. At first I figured poachers, squatters, or even a lost hiker. My job was to check, so I trudged over. But when I stepped inside the cabin, it was empty, not just empty, vacant to its bones. Dust thick enough to track footprints in. Spider webs clinging like curtains to the corners. No sleeping bag, no rucksack, no human presence. And yet on the table in the corner sat an old mining lantern. Glass cracked. Handle rusted stiff, burning with the soft flutter of orange flame. I froze. Lanterns like that don't light themselves. And even if some idiot had lit it and left, the wick should have been bone-dry decades ago. I backed out slowly, my boots crunching on old wood and in the dead silence of the valley. The only sound was the hiss-pop of that lantern. Flame. That's when I realized there wasn't a single footprint in the dust or snow. Except my own. I considered smashing the lantern, snuffing it out and chalking it up as a good spooky story for campfires. But I couldn't bring myself to touch it. My gut told me it wasn't mine to meddle with. So instead I made camp not far off, figuring I'd watch, make sure no squatters or vagrants crept in after dark. The woods went silent in that unnatural way, like when a predator's near. No owls, no rustle of tiny feet in the brush. Just the beat of my heart echoing inside my ears while I stared at that cursed shack with its warm, flickering glow. Around midnight, the lantern light wavered. It grew brighter, sharper, as if someone had just pumped fresh air into its chamber. I sat up, rifle across my knees, and that's when I heard the crunch of boots. Heavy, dragging, coming from inside the mine shaft. Out staggered a figure, no mistake about it. A man, or what used to be one. He was tall, gaunt, wrapped in tattered flannel and suspenders, his beard blackened with grime. At first I thought maybe some hermit had been living in the shaft. But then he turned his head toward me, and everything in me revolted. Skin pale as wax, eyes like burned-out sockets, lips cracked open in a half-snarl, half-smile that never shifted. He clutched something in one filthy hand, another lantern. Exactly like the one sitting in the shack, except this one was unlit. He shuffled forward, boots grinding in the frost, heading straight for that little cabin like it was the only road left in the world. I ducked low, breath steaming in the night air, certain he'd seen me. But he didn't glance my way. He shuffled inside, the glow in the shack flaring bright as the two lanterns touched. And then the flame rose blue, a blue so sharp it bent the shadows on the snow. From inside came a cough, dry and rattling, joined by another, then another, until it sounded like a whole camp of men racked with sickness, laughing and arguing in the same breath. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused. I sat rooted, listening, eyes locked on that spectral radiance burning where no fire should. When dawn came, the voices ceased. Morning light washed the valley gray. The lantern still burned, weak and orange again, the way it had before. I could have left it. Could have walked back down the pass and told myself the altitude, the silence, and the loneliness had tricked me. But the ranger code is drilled into me. Leave no hazard behind. And a constantly burning flame in a brittle wooden shack? That was a hazard, ghost or no ghost. So, against my better judgment, I stepped inside at first light. The lantern sat there, flickering low. I reached for it, jerking when the heat singed my fingers. That's what chilled me the most. It was hot. It wasn't some illusion. This dead, impossible relic was alive. I lifted it, carried it out of the shack. The moment I crossed the threshold, the voices burst back to life. They rose on the wind out of the shaft behind me, men shouting about stolen claims, fighting over gold, roaring in coughs and curses. The snow trembled like boot heels striking the earth beneath it. Then, clear above the noise, a single voice boomed, "Put it back!" I staggered, clutching that burning lantern. The light flared, then shrank, as if begging me to obey. I don't remember dropping it, but I must have because suddenly it was lying in the snow. Fire snuffed out as though water had doused it. Silence fell instantly. When I lifted my head, the figure stood at the mine's edge again. Silent, sun glaring off empty eyes. His unlit lantern swung loosely in his hand. I didn't stick around. I grabbed my pack and made tracks down the mountain, but here's the part that eats at me. A week later, hiking a different trail, far from Hatcher's Pass, I stopped for water by a creek. When I set down my canteen, there it was, on a stump across from me, sitting like it had just been placed there, that same cracked glass lantern, flickering with a weak, defiant flame. No footprints led to or from it. No smell of oil. No explanation. Just that same impossible light, daring me to touch it again. I keep wondering if I carry it with me now, whether I walked away from the valley or if part of it came with me. Sometimes, nights in my cabin, I'll see a faint orange glow down the hall where no lamp burns, and I feel the weight of all those coughing voices pressing in. I'll tell you this, and you had better believe me. Some lanterns in Alaska will never go out, and if you try to carry their light, it'll follow you long after you're gone.